Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Wanted to do a quick video here on a scene from an episode of The Last of Us. This is a show on HBO, and for those of you who haven't seen it, it's not too spoilery. So feel free to watch it. It's not really going to spoil too much about the show, but I thought it's a really good example um, for those of you who are into MBTI and personality types and all that, with the eye towards writing fiction or just understanding fiction, analyzing fiction, movies, stories, that kind of thing, with through the lens of, you know, personality types, MBTI. And you'll see that writers who presumably understand this stuff do a really good job of sort of pitting different personality types against each other, sort of a juxtaposition, so to speak, to drive home a point about what's going on with the story or the relationship between characters. And one of the devices you'll often see, especially from really good writing, is sort of matching up um, opposing personality types, or maybe even think of it as opposing cognitive functions, right? Where you have somebody with strong TE interacting with somebody with strong FE, and the person with TE is having an FE crisis, or vice versa. Maybe the person with strong FE is having a TE crisis. But here in this story, in The Last of Us, we have a situation where the character Joel, who you see here, is in this sort of situation where he's sort of taken on the responsibility of watching over a young girl who's about his daughter's age. And in my mind, the guy is pretty clearly an ISTJ, or something where he's probably FE polar, or at least FE inferior, where he has these FE issues of not knowing how to deal with this girl that he's watching over. And so in this scene, he's talking to the girl's friend, and the girl's friend is clearly an FE user, very, very adept at using FE. And just watching the interaction and what's going on in this scene has all kinds of subtext that really drive home the theme of what's going on, where you have this guy who's very good at TE stuff, right? So fixing things. And, throughout the series, it's, very action based, and he is very good at figuring out like how to get himself out of a jam in a very TE kind of way, as you would expect with an action hero. But not only that, but he's very good with mechanical things, that kind of TE stuff. And at this part of the story, he's struggling with an FE, dilemma of he's had somewhat of a falling out, or sort of a awkward situation going on with this girl that he's taking care of. And if you've seen the first season, you'll know what's going on. I won't spoil that. But he doesn't really know how to deal with it, or how to fix it, or even really understand what exactly is going on. So let's watch the scene, and you can sort of piece it together yourself of what I'm getting together, what I'm getting at here.
There in a minute.
What you doing?
Fixing these breakers. They were going to chuck the whole panel, but all they need is new springs.
Teach me?
Okay, just to be clear, this is not the girl that he's having the issue with. This is her friend, but she's a very strong FE user, and she's sort of finding a way to engage with him. And really, she couldn't care less about this thing that he's fixing, but she's trying to use her FE to sort of engage with him and get into his world here.
Okay. Oh, well, first thing first. Before you mess with circuits, You gotta check if the wires are live. So how do you do that?
I lick them.
Voltage tester. Now, this right here is the part that matters. Bimetallic strip. Too much current runs through, heats up the strip, it bends, releases the lever, circuit breaks. Otherwise, the wires get hotter and hotter, lights the inside of your walls on fire. There goes your house.
Can I ask a
Okay, so note how easily he deals with this TE stuff. It just comes naturally to him. He doesn't really even have to think about it that hard.
question?
Shoot.
Why is she angry at you?
Okay, so she doesn't care about it, this TE stuff. She's trying to get at what's going on with the relationship with him and this girl he's watching over. She's getting into the FE nitty-gritty stuff. And so let's watch how he reacts. He went from explaining something and showing his knowledge about, this physical object that he's fixing with, very very little problems, very smoothly, no hesitation, thinks about it very, with very little effort. And now watch what happens when he gets switched into FE world.
She said she was angry?
No, but
You're her best friend. Reckon she would have told you.
nope.
Well, I figure it's normal. Her being 19 and me being her, what I am. No one likes their parents at that age. I never got there with my own kids, so we're both just figuring it out for the first time is all. We'll get through it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the springs hold the
The
levers.
thing is, I try. I know I'm a hard ass and maybe overprotective, and she's her. But, I mean, what did I do?
I don't know.
Yeah, well, I can't hold myself responsible for another person's emotional state.
Are you in fucking therapy?
Okay, so again, notice how awkward it was for him to try to figure out what the problem is or even a solution to this FE problem he's having. And he's almost trying to give these like TE, maybe SI type responses of, sort of platitudes, sort of just things that people always say, oh, she's a teenager, and that's just how teenagers are. Very kind of TE way of addressing the problem. And again, like he barely could even like figure out what exactly the issue is. And then he sort of gets busted at the end there, where he sort of gives off a line that he clearly heard from some sort of therapist or something, and she catches on because she's like, there's no way he would have thought of that himself. And so that had to have been coming from somewhere, so it must be coming from a therapist. So point is, if you're a writer or you just like watching a good movie and watching good writing and good character development, this is one of the tricks of the trade, right? To show somebody is competent at something like maybe TE, and by two or three sort of throwaway lines where he's just explaining this little gadget that he's fixing, right? Just to show that he's not completely incompetent, right? And he's not lazy, he's not an idiot. He just has a problem with this FE stuff. It just doesn't make sense in his mind, because people are not machines, right? Like I say all the time on this channel in my videos, you have an FE part of the brain and a TE part of the brain, because people are weird, and you have to interact with people in a much different way than you interact with machines. because you need more flexibility. You need to be able to pick up on, feedback loops, things like that when you're dealing with people, because they're not always going to act the same way in the way that gadgets work, right? So he's very comfortable with gadgets, very uncomfortable with people. And then you throw into the scene this character, and if you watch, more of the show, you'll see that she's very FE. She's probably an ESFJ or maybe an ENFJ, but very, FE driven. Um, and you sort of pit those two personalities together, and you can sort of get deeper into what's going on with him, right? Rather than, through storytelling, rather than just sort of saying it out loud, so to speak. So I thought this was a really good example. Be interested in hearing if anybody has other examples out there that are worth looking at. But to me, this is a real good example of showing TE pitted against FE, in a character that's clearly having an FE crisis in this part of the show. Um, but also trying to show that, he's not an idiot, he's a smart guy, but his mind is just a TE mind and not really an FE mind. Okay, I think that's about it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Talk to you next time.